right, so listen to this. Okay. A missing report. A frustrated opposition leader, A&D, an election coming up pretty soon. It kind of sounds like one of those political thriller movies, right? And guess what? That's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. We're going deep into Guyanese politics, specifically all the stuff that's still going on from the 2020 election.
It's really interesting to me how one event can still be causing problems years later. It shows you how important trust and transparency are in a democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. So for today's deep dive, we're using a recent article from News Source Guyana from November 15th, 2024. It's all about opposition leader Aubrey Norton calling out the Attorney General Anil Nandlall about this report that seems to have disappeared. It's like, what is it about this report? What's got everyone so riled up?
Well, it was supposed to be about all these accusations of voter fraud that happened in the 2020 election, which is something that's still a big issue in Guyana. And to really get this, we need to go back to September 2022.
Okay, so let's jump back in time to 2022. What was going on then?
Back then, the Elections Commission gave what they called evidence of voter impersonation to the Attorney General. This evidence actually originally came from the APNU plus AFC party, which was the main opposition group back then. Now, the article doesn't get into specifics about what this evidence was.
Wait, hold on. So this APNU plus AFC, is that the same as the PNCR APNU that was mentioned before? It's kind of confusing for people like me who don't know Guyanese politics that well.
Yeah, I can see how that would be confusing. Basically, the PNCR is the biggest party inside this bigger APNU group. So when they talk about APNU plus AFC, they're talking about this whole coalition that ran in the 2020 election, which includes the PNCR.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining that.
Oh.
So going back to this evidence.
Right, the details are kind of fuzzy. But from what we know from other places, the opposition said it was stuff like lists of dead people who supposedly voted and people who voted even though they weren't even in the country. If that's true, that's a pretty big deal.
Wow, that's some serious stuff.
Yeah.
So what did the Attorney General do with this supposed evidence?
Well, at the time, he said he would share it with the government agencies who could look into it and see if it was real. Seems pretty reasonable, right?
Yeah, for sure. You'd think that's what they would do.
But here's the thing. It's been 2 years and nothing. No report, no announcement, nothing.
Are you serious? You mean this report has been sitting somewhere for 2 years? Why would it take that long?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's why Aubrey Norton and his party, the PNCR, are saying something's fishy. They think this silence means something's up, and it makes them think even more that the 2020 election was rigged.
Yeah, I get why they'd be mad. If it were me, I'd be asking for answers too. But what does all this have to do with the election that's coming up in 2025?
Well, Norton is using this whole thing to say that they need to change some big things about how they run elections. He wants them to make a whole new list of voters and to start using fingerprint scanning. He's basically saying, look, we need better ways to make sure the election is fair and people can trust it.
A whole new voter list and fingerprint scanning? That sounds like a pretty big change. What's the reasoning behind that?
I mean, a new voter list could sound like a good idea, but it could also stop some people from being able to vote if they don't do it right. It's important to keep in mind that opposition parties a lot of times say they want a new voter list before elections, especially if they think the old one helps the party that's already in power. It's a way to try and make things more fair. As for the fingerprint scanning, that's something a lot of countries are starting to use to stop voter fraud.
So it's all about making sure the problems they say happened in the last election don't happen again. But wouldn't it be a huge amount of work to actually do all of that?
Oh, definitely. It would take a ton of resources and time and people working together. But for Norton and the people who agree with him, it's not just about that stuff. It's about making people trust the system again, because it seems like that trust got messed up after the 2020 election.
It sounds like there's way more going on here than we can see at first. This isn't just about one election. This is about the whole idea of democracy in Guyana.
Exactly. And this shows how easy it is to break those democratic systems when people don't trust each other.
Okay, so we've got a missing report, an unhappy opposition, and people wanting to change everything. What does this all mean for what's going to happen with politics in Guyana? We'll talk more about that right after this.
You know, this whole thing in Guyana makes you think about something really important. Why is it so important for people to trust elections? And why does releasing this report or not releasing it matter so much?
It's kind of like when you're in a relationship and one person thinks the other person is doing something wrong, but they won't actually talk about it. That just makes things worse, right?
That's a perfect way to put it. And it fits this situation perfectly. People have the right to know what's happening, especially when it's something as important as voting. If the government really thinks they didn't do anything wrong, then they should just release the report. Even if it proves the opposition is wrong, it would help people start trusting them again.
Okay, but let's look at it from the other side for a second. What if the report actually does say that some messed up things happened? Wouldn't that be bad for the ruling party?
Of course, there's always that risk. But trying to hide problems doesn't make them go away. It usually makes things worse. If they don't talk about these concerns and be honest about them, it's just going to cause more problems later on.
So it's like they're stuck, right? They have to choose between being honest and protecting themselves. But isn't there a way to do both? Can't they look into these claims really carefully and be fair,
Yeah,
but also keep some information secret if they need to?
absolutely. That's where independent groups and the courts come in. They have to make sure that elections are fair and that everyone can trust them. They can be neutral and investigate things without picking sides.
So let's say, just for example, that an independent group actually investigates this in Guyana. What could happen? And what would those different outcomes mean for the country?
Well, one thing that could happen is they find out that the opposition was right about voter fraud. If that happened, it would be a huge deal. It could mean that they have to do a whole new election or that people sue each other. It could even cause big political problems. It would be a big test for Guyana's democracy.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. What if the investigation says there was nothing wrong? Would that be enough to finally put an end to all of this?
It might, but there's no guarantee. See, we're talking about political groups that really don't like each other, and there's not a lot of trust. Even if everyone thinks the investigation was fair, the people who lose might still not accept it. It's sad, but that's just how things are these days.
It's a lose-lose situation, isn't it? No matter what happens, someone's going to be unhappy. And with social media making things even worse, it seems like the fighting and disagreements are never going to end.
Exactly. That's why it's so important for people to trust the system. It's not just about one election. It's about making sure most people think the system is fair.
Okay, so let's go back to Guyana. What does this all mean for the election in 2025? Is it going to be another mess?
It could be, but it doesn't have to be. There are things they can do to make things less risky and to help people feel more confident about the election.
So what can they do? What are some actual things they could do to fix these problems and make people trust the elections again?
Well, one big thing would be for the government to be more open and honest. If they released the report about the voter fraud, even if they blocked out some parts, it would at least show that they care what the opposition thinks. It's about showing that they want to do the right thing, even if they don't agree on everything.
Right. It's like saying, we hear you and we're taking this seriously.
What else? Another important thing is to make the group that runs the election stronger and more independent. That means giving them enough money and smart people and power to run the election fairly and well, without any political party telling them what to do.
And don't forget about the voters themselves. They need to know what's going on. Educating people about how the election works and stopping the spread of lies and encouraging people to vote and do it peacefully, that can all make a big difference.
You're absolutely right. People who are informed and who participate, that's what makes a democracy strong. When people understand how things work and believe that their vote matters, it makes the whole system stronger.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do in Guyana. But is Guyana the only place dealing with this? Are other democracies around the world going through similar things?
It's sad to say, but Guyana is not the only one having these problems. All over the world, democracies are dealing with the same stuff, like elections not being fair and people not trusting the system. It's almost like democracy itself is being tested everywhere.
So this isn't just something happening in Guyana, it's like a global thing.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of this happening?
Well, think about all the times people say other countries are messing with elections. And then you've got fake news spreading online and populism getting more popular and people not trusting the regular news anymore. All of these things are connected and they're all putting a lot of pressure on democracies.
To be honest, this is starting to feel kind of overwhelming. What can we even do about this? As regular people, how can we deal with all of this and help protect democracy both where we live and in the whole world?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It might seem impossible, but I think the first thing is realizing that we have to be involved. We have to stay informed, pay attention to politics, and make sure our leaders are doing what they're supposed to do. Those are all super important if we want to keep our democracy safe.
You're right, we can't just sit back and watch it. But it's not just about voting right. What else can we do to actually participate in our democracies?
It's about way more than just voting. It's about supporting groups that believe in democracy and speaking out against things that are wrong and talking to people who have different opinions than us, even if it's hard. And getting involved in our local communities. It's about being an active citizen in every way.
Yeah, and it's important to listen to what other people have to say, even if we don't like it. Because that's the only way we can actually understand each other and make things better.
Exactly. Building connections, understanding each other, and finding things we agree on, those are all really important for a healthy democracy. It's not about everyone agreeing on everything. It's about figuring out how to live together and work together even when we disagree.
This has been a really eye-opening look into what's happening in Guyana. It's clear that things are really serious, but it also gives me hope to know that there are things we can do to make a difference.
I agree. It reminds us that democracy is something that always needs work. It's not just something we have and that's it. We always have to be paying attention and be willing to change when things change, and that's where we come in as citizens who are involved.
So before we finish up, I want to leave you with something to think about. Imagine you live in Guyana. How would all of this make you feel about the election that's coming up? What would you want to see happen to make sure the election is fair and honest?
That's a good question to think about. It reminds us that we all have a part to play in how democracy works, not just in our own countries, but all over the world.
Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive. We hope you'll keep learning about what's happening in Guyana and about the challenges that democracies are facing all over the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay involved, and keep on diving deep.